This is talk on argument structure in academic English. And it's here to accompany a pretty boring textbook, I think, but it gives you lots of useful phrases to use to present academic arguments and to link them. And here I'm going to be working on the basics of it, and specifically at some points that become difficult for speakers of Catalan and Spanish. Okay, let's go from the very beginning, how to present lists, just lists of things. And these are the kinds of things you would present, for example, in your literature review, or when you're presenting what you're going to do in your paper at the beginning in the introduction. Here you go. Berlitz, we've got the reference. Mr. Berlitz of the language schools actually had a method for teaching languages, and he didn't like translation, and he gave 3 reasons. So here we've got a way of presenting the 3 reasons. He gives 3 reasons, colon, first, comma, second, comma, and third, comma. Okay? And these reasons are 1 sentence there. Because it's a predication in a sentence, it's got a semicolon at the end. Another predication, full sentence with a semicolon, and then a full stop. Okay, 1, 2, 3. You can have 2, you can have 4, you can have 6, it doesn't matter. It's introduced there with a colon. Okay, so a colon there, comma after each, first, second, third, and then a semicolon at the end of these. That punctuation is pretty important, I think, if you're doing it like that. When you give a list, which is visually in block language here, 1, 2, 3, there are some divergences. Catalan, for example, would really want a lowercase capital there, and there. Catalan would not like to see those with capital letters. English, I think, is happy because it is a sentence, so it does merit a capital letter there. Once again, you have the semicolons at the end. Okay, so it won't be a grave error if you apply Catalan stylistics here, but for me it looks better with a capital letter there. It's important when you're presenting the lists of things like this that each item be on the same grammatical level. So here, each item is a predication with a verb in the present tense, occupies, causes, are. Okay, it's not good to mix up tenses, and it's not good to mix up, for example, a noun phrase with an entire predication or a verb phrase. Here's a way of doing the same thing. Here I've just reduced it to noun phrases. 3 arguments, wasted time, L1 interference, absence. So you've got here noun phrases, the heads time, interference, absence, and they're all on the same level. Stylistically, that's quite important. It's one of the common errors. You think you're going to give a list of things and you just start speaking about them. Visually and grammatically, they should have the same status. So much for lists. Let's move on to definitions. If you're in your methodology chapter, for example, you're going to explain how you approach your object of knowledge, and you're going to have to define a few basic terms. The way to do this, the simplest way, is X. In this paper, X refers to Y, or this term X refers, or this term refers to Y. In this paper, X refers to Y, or I am taking X to mean. Okay, which means in what I'm doing now, I assume that X means Y. What you can't do is this: X is referred to Y. And that's because you're thinking in Spanish or Catalan, se refiere a, and you think that a reflexive in Spanish Catalan becomes a passive in English, therefore you need a passive. No way. False friend, false syntactic calc. X refers to Y. It's as simple as that. Okay. Other things that can be done with passives, which can be done, photosynthesis can be defined as, that's in the textbook. Se puede definir como. That there, the passive really works. Okay, passive here in English, rendering the reflexive in Spanish, and se puede ver como, or se deja ver, can be seen as. Okay, note though, this is a definition, can be defined as. This is what it is. But if I say post-colonialism can be seen as, that's not a definition, it's just giving us one aspect of it, the aspect that you're going to deal with, most probably. Okay, so that's a definition. This is not a definition, it's an introduction of your thematic focus. Definitions can also be given in a glossary, probably at the beginning of your dissertation here, your trabalho de grau in this case. Just present it as definitions. Post-colonialism, colon, group of studies dealing with, and in English I do prefer the capital letter, but you could argue it should not have a capital letter here, okay? That's a noun, this is a noun phrase, okay? ST, start text, comma, the text a translator works from. TT, colon, target text, comma, the text produced by a translator, okay? There you've got the sigla, and here you've got a short noun phrase with this one indicating what the sigla mean, and then this one spelling it out. Do not say, that's why it's in red, so you don't say it. It can refer to, or something like that. You don't need a this, you don't need an it, you don't need anything here. English is a really brutal, simple language. Just give us the thing, the noun phrase. Okay? That's how definitions should be in a glossary. Don't say it can refer to, please. I move now to the aspect that I think is the most problematic, where we get most syntactic calques or interference coming from Spanish and Catalan into English. Now, the actual sentence I worked from when I gave the previous example was this. You can see here it's saying the same thing, but it's got a lot more words. And academic Spanish and academic Catalan tends to have a lot more words than academic English. Why? Because good style in English is as simple as possible with as few words as possible. If you can delete words, do so. Now, all those things in red here can be deleted. Hey, he wrote that book, so obviously he argues that, he maintains that, he argues that. You can get rid of those things, and if you can get rid of them, in English, you get rid of them, which is what I did when I presented the example. If you're thinking in Spanish, you might produce a sentence like this in English. Therefore, así que, así pues. Yeah? Given the arguments we have seen, and in view of the many criticisms received, we can say that it is worth considering. Snell Hornby's work on the okay? Now, in English, all those things in red would normally disappear. You don't need them. You get rid of them. Okay? English is a brutal language. You could start the paragraph, Snell Hornby has worked on the translation of X. Or further, comma, Snell Hornby has worked on, if you really need a connector. Or I thus turn to, thus is a beautiful little connector. It's only 4 letters. 4 letters says everything that's all in this red up here. Okay, folks? Forget about all these cohesion devices, these things that refer to where you are in the text, or that assume the reader really hasn't been reading you. Just give us the information, and if necessary, if you have to use a cohesion device, make it a little one, like thus, or further. One word is pretty good in English. The golden rule for these cohesion devices, for the things that relate a paragraph to the next one and things like that, it's what surgeons are taught, I believe, when they're operating on your body. If in doubt, cut it out. If you're not sure if it should be in, take it out. Okay? Your academic English will be much better as a result. As few words as possible. When you're presenting different viewpoints or different arguments, you connect them in various ways. A very common way is to stress the similarity between arguments or how they connect together. The most beautiful adverbial in English to do this is similarly. Del mismo modo, de modo parecido. Similarly. You can also say in the same way, but that's more thinking in Catalan or Spanish. It's not wrong in English, but similarly sounds more English. You can say X is similar to Y in that both have. And in Spanish you would say en la medida en que, which in English would be to the extent that, which is correct. Okay? But that to the extent that can be reduced in English to in that, similar to Y in that. You see, English is a language of economy. We prefer similarly to in the same way. We prefer in that to the extent that. And then you have regular connection devices that you should be very familiar with. Both X and Y are, neither X nor Y are. Okay, I'm not going to go back into that. If you don't know it by now, it's probably too late. More interesting are occasions when you have to refute an argument or a viewpoint, that is, mark off differences. The best way to do this in English is with something at the front and a comma. However, comma, many have criticized this post-colonialism because, okay? You can say at the same time, many have criticized. At the same time means, however, okay? Or nevertheless, or nonetheless. These are all exchangeable, okay? A smart variation is much as this might be true, or although this might be true, many have criticized. That can be okay too. Although this might be true, many have criticized. Now, there are some problems about although and though, and they get mixed up all the time. If you're using a marker at the head of the sentence, if it's in a prominent position, you will put although, okay? And though tends to be used in medial position as an interjection. Medial position means we must remember, though, that many have criticized. Would be like, we must remember, however, that many have, or we could say, we must remember, nevertheless, we must remember, nonetheless. All these things can be used in medial position. Though is better in medial position here, and although is up there as a subordinator. Okay? Although for the big one, though for the little interjection one, if you want a rule of thumb. The most common false friend here, the most common interference from Romance languages, no, from really Spanish and Catalan, not Romance, is this one. On the contrary. You say in Spanish, por el contrario, in Catalan, pal contra, or en canvi, all right? And these are very common. And it looks like these can be translated by on the contrary, because contrario is contrary, right? In English, though, on the contrary is really working in the same way as au contraire does in French. To negate a prior value with its opposite. Okay? It's not connecting big arguments or viewpoints. It's connecting small values within a sentence. Here's an example. There is no free subjectivity in Derrida. On the contrary, his analyses are extremely exacting. Okay? The contrary is between this free subjectivity is the direct opposite of extremely exacting. And that's how on the contrary is used, when one value is negated by the next one which has more weight. Some say that translation wastes teaching time. On the contrary, it is an efficient way of presenting. Okay? Here you're arguing directly against the previous statement. But if in doubt, here again, if in doubt, don't use on the contrary. It's hard to use. It has more to do with oral rhetoric, with the sort of stuff a politician might say. If in doubt, just go back to these things, the however, nonetheless, although. These are safe. On the contrary is hard and dangerous, and only use it if you feel you really are doing what these examples indicate. Refuting a viewpoint, can be done in one beautiful little word in English, yet. And you don't need a comma. Yet it is precarious to assume that. You can say but, although classical stylistics say you shouldn't begin a sentence with but. It's too rude, too forthright. Okay, it's grammatically correct though. Yet, though, is not but, and it does the job very nicely. You don't need a comma for these things. Like so. So it can be seen. You don't need the comma. In Spanish, you would say así, así pues. And you're putting in commas. No, in English, the so works as well without the comma. You get several viewpoints or arguments that can be balanced. You know how to do this. On the one hand, on the other. You don't have to say on the other hand. That's implicit. But you can put it in if you want. Here we go. On the one hand, tabalbeaskoa, da-da-da, sees da-da-da-da-da. On the other, beganaute, da-da-da, sees the opposite thing. All right? So we don't have to repeat the hand here. Notice that's a predication, and I think it's correct to have a semicolon there. If you put a comma, nobody would complain too much, I think. Note that sometimes you can assume the first. Here's the same idea for tabalbeaskoa, da-da-da-da-da, for peganote. On the other hand, there is a barrier between the two. Here, I'm only using the second on the other hand, but it implies that the first one could have been there, and that's okay as well. Very rarely would you have to actually spell out on the one hand, on the other hand. Balancing viewpoints. Something is true, the other is true. While it can be argued that X, it is also true that Y. Okay, while is normal current English. Whilst with the ST is sort of dated British English. It's not used in an American English. They don't really know what it's doing there. I don't really know why we have that form. I suggest that you just stick with while and condemn that one to the dustbin of history. Unless you really love British English, in which case you can whilst away all you like. Sometimes you want to continue the argument. The best way to do this is the shortest word. Further. Further, comma, recent research has demonstrated. You can say furthermore, but it means the same as further. You can say in addition, but it means the same as further. Thus, if you're summarizing a qualitative argument, is again a beautiful way to make connections. It's very short. And this thing here, we can see then that many mistakes have been made, is seen in academic writing. But it's seen more in academic writing from Spanish, because you're thinking, podemos ver pues, comma, pues, da, da, da. It's not really needed in English. We can see that many mistakes have been made, or we can thus see that many mistakes have been made. This is English. The other is sort of thinking in Spanish and writing in English. How do you present your conclusions? What you don't do, I suggest, is this. In conclusion, and to sum up what we have seen, it can be said that, no way, all that is rubbish. Get rid of it. Here's some ways, short ways, you can conclude. It can be concluded that, if you want to use a dummy it, we find that, thus we find that, it must be accepted that, it is clear that, or if you like, the conclusion appears to be that, we want to get rid of the first person, or to summarize, to sum up. Okay? The important point I want to get across is you don't need all these things that you seem to need in Hispanic languages. Now, there's lots of connectors and lots of things that enable bits of language to be put together. My final point is that they should be used sparingly. In English, the strength of the ideas themselves should hold together if it's well presented. Okay? So, in the introduction, you're not going to use a lot of this stuff. You're just going to tell what you're going to do. You probably have lists. In the literature review, you'll have lists and you'll have oppositions. Well, some people say this, other people say that. Your methodology section, again, will be lists. Your results will be lists. Methodology would have your definitions as well, by the way. The results will be lists. And it's only in the discussion part that you're really comparing and opposing different viewpoints. This is where you would expect all the cohesion devices to be going. And then in the conclusions section, you present your conclusions as simply as possible. So, simplicity reigns, and the golden rule, as I said, When in doubt, cut it out.